Have you been looking to downsize into a more modest home or move up into a larger home, but were freaked out by the prospect of paying twice the interest rate you're currently paying? Then this could be the most important video you will watch this entire year. And why do you always hear realtors saying, marry the house but date the rate? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to show you in this video. Hi, my name is Mark Minnick, and I'm with Coldwell Banker Realty in Cheshire. And I just celebrated my 20th anniversary of becoming a realtor by upgrading my salesperson's license into a broker's license. And today I wanted to show you a historical perspective on what's happened over the last 20 years and how you can use this information to make an educated decision about whether or not you should finally pull the trigger and trade in your current home for a home that better suits your needs in 2025. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I put together a little spreadsheet for you that takes you through the last 20 years of me being in this business. So I'm going to use 2025. I got licensed as a realtor in the tail end of let me first share my screen here. Got to do that. There we go. Share screen. So I got my real estate license at the tail end of 24, and I spent the first 3 years doing this part time. Became a full-time realtor January 1, 2008. That's when I finally hung up my chauffeur hat and I decided to dive in full time. And what great timing that was, right? But thankfully, I was with Keller Williams back at the time, and they were all about teaching us how to do short sales because they knew that that was going to be the market of the moment. So I took those classes, and I'm glad I did because that's what most of the deals I were doing in 2008. And in fact, I became so good at it that I actually was helping out some of the veterans in the office as a first year full time realtor. So I managed to make it through that, and 20 years later, I'm still kicking. So let me show you exactly what's been happening since I became an agent. In 2005, and I went ahead and I looked at, I'm comparing the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rates for that year against the number of homes sold that year and the median price for those homes in that year. Now, typically what happens when interest rates go down, you're typically going to see more homes being sold and a higher price for those homes being gotten. Um, when the interest rates, however, go up, the opposite happens. You'll see fewer homes sold, and you'll see a lower sale price for those homes. Anytime that doesn't happen, there's typically some kind of external force putting pressure on the market for that to not happen. And we're going to go through all those examples. So for 2005, so this is our baseline. The average 30-year fixed rate that year was 5.93%. The number of homes sold that year was 7.08 million, which you'll notice is never been matched in the last 20 years. And the median price across the country at that time was 236,550. So 2006 comes along. The rates actually go up by about 9%. The average from the it went up from 5.93 to 6.47. That did result in a reduced number of home sales by 8%, but it resulted in a price increase of about 3%. Why? Bill? That was the final year of the strong Bush economy. That's when people's paychecks were still keeping up with the increase in pricing, so everyone was still buying houses. 2007 came along. Well, that turned into a different story very quickly. That was the year the Fed probably should have started cutting rates, but they did not. So, as you can see, the base rate change was about 1%, which I consider an insignificant number. Because the economy finally started to slow down, the number of home sales dropped by 23%, which is a very large number. There's 1.5 million homes fewer sold that year. That resulted in a base price change of basically not very much. So 2008 comes along, and because they did not start cutting rates, they only fell by about 3% that year, saw another 18% drop in sales and a 6% change in price. Why? Because that's when the financial crisis finally hit the fan. And that's so 2009. That's when the Fed finally kicks itself into gear. We get a new administration in town, and they finally start cutting interest rates because, well, we can't have the economy crashing around us. So they finally dropped interest rates. The average 30-year fix fell by about 14% that year. So it did result in a slight increase in the number of sales, but it also still resulted in a price change decrease. Why? Well, because we were still in the throes of the economy was still in the toilet. So they passed the stimulus bill, that big stimulus bill, the American Recovery and Restoration Act of 2009. Um, Yeah, and that's because the economy was still struggling at that point. The Fed continued to cut interest rates. We finally saw them dip under 5% that year, which was a 10% cut from the previous year. It did result in a slight price change increase, but it also resulted in a 4% decrease in the number of sales. And the reason for that was because Obamacare also passed that year in the beginning of that year. And that's kind of spooked employers. That ended up increasing their healthcare costs for their associates. So they ended up cutting a lot of payroll that year. So fewer people with jobs resulted in fewer people being able to buy homes. But the ones that still had jobs and were able to buy homes, well, that's why we saw a slight increase in the sales prices. 2011, we're still in the throes of that recession. Interest rates drops a little bit. Sales the increase in sales was very modest, and so was the price change. It was basically insignificant. 2012, that's when we finally start turning the corner. Feds aggressively cut rates again. The rate change dropped to 17% from the previous year. So that resulted in a 9% increase in the number of sales and a 9% increase in prices. So that was the first year in a while that we saw a cut in interest rates result in the intended effect on sales and on prices. We also had another bit of good news that year. We had bin Laden killed. We finally got the mastermind of 9/11, and that resulted in a newfound confidence in consumer confidence in Americans, and that ended up resulted in getting the economy kicking off again. And in 2013, in fact, that was the first full year of that economic recovery. We finally saw GDP grow every single quarter that year. So, despite the 7% increase in interest rates, we still saw another 9% increase in the number of sales and another 9% increase in sales prices. 2014, we saw another increase in the interest rate. It did result in a slight dip in the number of sales, but it also saw another increase in price changes. Why? Because the economy was still roaring. 2015, we finally saw another decrease in interest rates, which also had the intended effect. We had an increase in sales and an increase in prices. 2016 comes along, we have the same thing happening. 2017 comes along, we finally see interest rates spike a little bit, for the first time in 3 years, which did reduce the number of sales down to 1% increase, but it also continued a 6% price increase, which was the highest number in also 3 years. Why? Well, because the economy kept rolling thanks to Trump's tax cuts. That resulted in people keeping more money in their pockets, and again, they could continue to afford to buy homes, so they bought them for higher prices. 2018 saw increase. So the market tried to correct itself by increasing the interest rates. They went up by 14% that year, which did see a drop in the sales price, and it did not see a significant change in the price increases. 2019 comes along. Well, we see the global economic slowdown. So that had a negative impact on interest rates, and it also had a negative impact on sales and on prices. So while Americans were still buying homes, I mean, we still had the same number of homes sold over the previous year. We saw a significant decline in demand from the foreign buyers. Typically, people outside the USA are, there's typically about 800,000 to a million sales coming from overseas. That number dropped to about four or 500,000 sales that year. So anytime you're going to see demand drop, you are going to see a drop in the number of homes sold and a drop in the number and a drop typically in the median price. So 2020 comes along, the Fed's cutting rates because they want to increase that demand. They dropped by 18% that year, and it did have its intended effect. It increased sales by 6%, and the sales prices finally started increasing again by 2%. Now, that should have stopped the Fed from cutting rates, but no. Why? Because COVID happened. So they kept cutting rates through the first half of that year without expecting, because we fell into a recession. They thought that it was going to continue, so they kept cutting rates, even though by the end of that year we actually almost got out of that recession thanks to Trump's strong economy. So the 2021 we saw interest rates fall to a historical low of 3.15% for a 30-year fixed. That is totally unheard of, and that's the reason why is because the Fed actually dropped its Fed borrowing rate, the rate that they charge other banks to lend to 0%. Never happened in our history. It's probably never going to happen in our history again. So don't count on it. It's not going to happen. You'd probably have to outlive Moses to see that happen, and he lived to be 120. So don't count on that happening anytime soon. That drop in interest rates also corresponded to the proper sales increase, but it ended up creating a substantial increase in prices by 17% over the previous year. It went from 328 150 to 383. That's a $55,000 increase. That is unheard of. So that's so what happens then? Well, that creates an inflation crisis because the Fed overcorrected in 2021. Well, that created an inflation crisis in 2022. So that's when the Fed finally started having to hike the interest rates, and they did it significantly. That drove the interest rate, the average rate from 3.15 to 5.53%, which is a 76% increase year over year. That did result in a drop of 18% in the number of sales, which is the most we saw since the financial crisis of 2008. But prices kept increasing by 13%. So we're not out of the inflation woods yet. So they continue to increase the interest rate. And it finally increases to an average of 7% that year. But the highest rate that we actually did reach was in October that year of 8.2%. So once interest rate increased to that point, it definitely had a significant increase on the number of transactions. It dropped to 19% over the previous year, and it finally curbed price increases. Not by much, but they finally tapped out. So now in 2024, increases when with the increases in interest rates finally stopping after watching them increase for the last 2 years, well, that's naturally going to get some buyers off the fence. And that's why the number of sales increased to what we are projecting at a 4.62 million over the 4.09 from the previous year. That's going to be a 13% price change increase. And right now, through the third quarter of this year, we see the median price right now in the country at 420, 400. It could reach this by the end of this year. Not really confident that that's going to happen. So, but it's probably going to stay somewhere around here by the time we get the end of year numbers. Now, now this is important because the what happened yesterday with the Fed rate cut, actually the Fed not cutting rates like we were expecting them to. There was projecting another 25-point basis cut, but that did not happen. That ended up adjusting the stock market by 1,100 points yesterday. And that also had an impact on the projections that all the prognosticators are making for 2025. We're in December 2024 right now. This is when I'm recording this video. So this is when all the professionals in the industry make their projections for the next year and beyond. There's about 15 to 20 different companies and organizations that actually make predictions about what's happening for what's going to happen with prices, what's going to happen with interest rates, what's going to happen with sales. So these are the averages that they're projecting right now. Before that rate cut that should have happened yesterday that didn't, they were projecting the interest rates were going to finish between 6.0 and 6.2% by the end of that year. By the end of 2025, now they're projecting between 6.4 and 6.6. So I split the difference and called it 650. So let's say this is what the projection that's going to be at the average rate for 2025. Homes sold next year, they adjusted that downward slightly too to 4.35 million, which is going to end up being a 6% decrease over our projected finish for 2024. But they also are increasing, projecting a slight increase in prices of 3%, which would bring it to about the same median sale price that we saw in 2022. Now, the historic appreciation for homes is about 6%, so it's about half that. Now, the reason why they're projecting that is because, well, we still have a shortage of inventory around the country. And in fact, we see that particularly here in Connecticut. And actually, Connecticut has kind of like lagged the rest of the country with every single one of these financial changes. So, like, for example, in 2009, that was when the market finally bottomed out nationwide. Well, Connecticut didn't bottom out until 2012. And in fact, we didn't start decreasing in prices until 2010. So from the 2010 begin of our decline, we didn't actually recover from that decline until 2018. That was when the median price was finally like 1% higher than it was in 2010. But we hit rock bottom in 2012. Again, right now, we have not seen our median price stop growing over the last 3 years. It's actually been increasing each of the last 3 years. We are now at at 395 for a median in the state of Connecticut. From like about 330 back in 2022. So but this is the year I think we're finally going to see that come to an end, like like it did around the rest of the country in 2022. So I'm using that historical perspective to basically, say if you're a home seller, the ride is probably over. You're probably not going to see any more from your home if you're looking to upsize or downsize. So now is the time that you really want to cash in on it. And because next year you're not going to see interest rates drop by very much, you're not going to see a whole flood of buyers coming into the market either. So you're going to be able to maximize the gain on your home without having to compete with too many other buyers for your next home. So, and so like, so if the interest rates do end up being about 6.5%, you're still probably going to be buying, where the top of the market where it is now. But I don't think you're going to see home prices dip by very much because of that shortage of inventory. Until that finally increases, you're not going to see prices come down anytime soon. So like, let's take, for example, let's say if you're going to be looking at 2025 the same as you would in 2026. Let's say, for example, that this is going to be like that time, and then 15 years down the road, you're going to see that 3.15% interest rate happen again. Well, in order for you to get to here, you're going to have to spend between in 2006, you would have to wait. You'd end up paying $140,000 more for that house that you would have bought in 2006 for 243. You'd be spending 383 for it. That's about a two-thirds increase in the price of your home. So if you're going to wait 15 years from now, where we're projecting a median of 432, yeah, you might get that 3% interest rate, but you're going to be spending 630 or $40,000 for the home. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd rather spend this now and wait 15 years so that way I get that $200,000 worth of equity, and I'm also paying off about $200,000 of this price to get that 3% interest rate. Now, probably not going to happen. Like I said, that was a once in a blue moon, once in 100-year event, because that's basically what COVID was. It was 100-year flu, right? So I don't think I think that's the best course of action for you to take in 2025 would be to finally make that trade up or trade down while the prices are going to kind of stay steady and the interest rates are not going to be spiking up. They might actually decrease a little bit because let's face it, if you're going to be waiting for the rates to climb back down to 3.15% again, you're going to be these folks. And I do not want that for you. So what you want to do is give me a call, 860-681-1956, and I'll take you through the best steps to take. I'll show you my perfect home finder system, which will actually help you locate an off-market or pre-listed home. So that way you're the only one that's actually going to be making an offer on it, and you may be able to get yourself a deal that way. I'll also show you on the seller side how I use my targeted marketing approach to actually get you the most opportune buyers and the highest number of those most opportune buyers. So that way they can get themselves into a bidding war and maybe drive up the price of your home a little more. So if you do want to use this information to make this the year that you make that move, please give me a call. I'd be happy to help you. And if I don't hear from you, I'd like you to take this opportunity to wish you a very Merry Christmas, and I will talk to you on the flip side. Take care and God bless.